Okay, we want to welcome everybody out. If you're watching online, we welcome you out as well. We're going to continue on in the study of the book of Hebrews, and we are in chapter 11. I have to have a real brief recap today because we have a lot to cover. So we are in the book of Hebrews, and this book of Hebrews was about Hebrew people who were being persecuted by their fellow countrymen, and they were being persecuted to mix the observance of the law with the application of grace or faith alone, and they knew they couldn't do that because Jesus had fulfilled the law, so to return to it would be an act of disobedience and rebellion, so the author wrote them just to kind of encourage them to kind of stay the course. Okay, now today we're going to begin a brief look at Abraham's son and his grandson's lives, and we'll probably focus most of our time on Jacob and Esau, who are his grandsons. But our main focus is going to be on the life of Jacob. Now, in chapter 11, as I said, it's the Hall of Faith. There's so much to cover, but it's a lot easier to explain if we go back and actually cover the lives of the people that are mentioned here. So we'll be talking about Jacob's life quite a bit over the next few weeks. Now, Jacob was one of those Bible characters that proves that God doesn't require perfection from us, which I don't know about you guys, but that gives me comfort when I see people in the Bible who's as big a screw up as I am. Because it makes me think that, there's hope for me. But he's one of those people for sure. But like most people, later in his life, he's gonna get it all straightened out and figure out what was truly important. But Jacob's life is one of the greatest illustrations of the reality of God's sovereignty. Because despite Jacob's faults, God still used him powerfully to accomplish his will. And I think that should be encouraging to all of us that he can use us despite our faults. But Jacob had a strained relationship with his twin brother Esau from the day they were born. And that strained relationship was an intricate part of his life and of his story. So I titled today's message, A Tale of Two Brothers. Now, the author of Hebrews only briefly mentions Isaac's blessing of his two sons here, Jacob and Esau. If you look at Hebrews 11, 20 and 21, it says, "By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of his sons Joseph and worshipped leaning on the top of his staff." Now, we'll look more at that in a few weeks, but that's kind of the entrance into the lives of Jacob. So he also briefly mentions, the author here of Hebrews briefly mentions Joseph and as well as Jacob's last moments with his grandsons. However, I think, it's important that we go to spend most of our time on the life of Jacob. There's so much there. So we're going to just take a brief look at some important and defining moments in Jacob's life. Now, there's a disclaimer. I know this is called the Hall of Faith, but there's just not a lot in this first message about Jacob's faith because we're kind of busting him out on everything that he's done in his life when he built up to that moment where he had the strong faith that put him in the Hall of Faith. So just a warning, this isn't going to be one of those messages that's super encouraging about faith because you're going to find out he didn't have a lot of it at this point. So let's take a look at this. Genesis 25, starting in verse 21. It said, "Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her." You might want to underscore that. "Struggled together within her. And she said, 'If it is so, why then am I this way?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.' When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment." That's what you want to see in baby pictures. Look, here's my little red hairy baby. And they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them." Am I the only one that thinks I would not want to have a kid at 60? Am I the only one? I'm just saying. But anyway, Isaac was 60, and he lived a long life, so I guess it wasn't too bad. But Isaac had a wife named Rebekah, as we just saw, and like his mother Sarah, she was barren, right? So Isaac prayed that God would open Rebekah's womb so she could conceive, and God answered this prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twin boys. Now, both the children struggled in her womb, and she didn't understand. She could feel conflict inside of her. She could feel, and I'll explain here in the Greek in a little bit, but she actually could feel them struggling in the womb with each other. She could feel that. And so she wanted to pray for understanding, so she asked God why. Now, the Hebrew word here for the phrase struggled together within her is interesting. because it means to oppress. It means to cause trouble, to cause hardship, to harass an opponent or an enemy. So these boys were harassing each other like opponents and enemies while in her womb, and she could feel that happening. So God responded by saying that she had 2 nations in her womb, and one would be stronger. God also told her that, contrary to the common tradition of that time, the older brother would serve the younger brother. And in their culture, the oldest brother was the heir. The oldest brother got everything. So this was contrary to all the traditions they knew at that time. It said that he said the older would serve the younger. Now, her twin boys were the start of a conflict between nations that exists to this day. There's still conflicts between the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Jacob at this very day. Now, Esau was born first, but when he came out, Jacob was holding onto his heel. So again, this proves that their conflict legitimately began within the womb. It was almost like he was trying to pull him back. You know how when you're racing when you're a kid, if you're losing, you like grab the person in front of you and try to pull him back? Anybody do that when they were a kid, or am I the only cheater? Has somebody else done that? Okay, just one? Seriously? Are you goody two-shoes? None of you guys tripped to somebody when you were... Me either. Anyway, it was almost like he was trying to grab him by the heel and pull him back in. So the firstborn was reddish in complexion and was really hairy, so they named him Esau. There was a little boy when I first got saved and realized I knew nothing about the Bible when I got saved. I was 22 and as spiritually ignorant as you could get. And this little boy from Sunday school runs up to me in the church I was in and goes, "Oh, you have red hair on your arm. You're like Esau." And I'm like, "Yeah." Who's Esau? I had no idea. But I'm not sure that's exactly what it meant by reddish. But it said he was really hairy and he was reddish. Now, in the Hebrew, Esau literally means rough and hairy. Isn't that a beautiful name to give your kid? Here's my son, rough and hairy. But anyway, so now Jacob had a normal appearance. He was born second. He had a normal appearance. But again, he was holding on to Esau's heel like he was trying to pull him back in. Now, the meaning of the name Jacob is both interesting and it's a little bit confusing because a lot of times you hear people just immediately say that Jacob means deceiver. And that's one of the definitions it can mean. It's not the only definition. But in Hebrew, the word Jacob actually comes from the word that means heel. Heel, which makes sense since he was holding on to Esau's heel, which is probably what gave him that idea. But Jacob has several other meanings, and we're only going to look at 3 of them for time's sake, but just to give you an idea. First, Jacob in the Hebrew can be used to mean to follow or to be behind, which makes sense because he was born second and he was following or born behind Esau, right? It can also mean to supplant, overreach, or deceive. To supplant, overreach, or deceive. This will make a lot of sense as we continue to go through Jacob's life. Because we're going to be here for 2 or 3 weeks. This will make a lot of sense, this definition. It also can mean, may God protect. Again, this is one of those things that will make a lot of sense as we move along. So Jacob's name was kind of complex. But it's important that we take a really close look at verses 23 and 24, and we'll be doing a message that's going to focus a lot on this as we come in the weeks to come. But Genesis 25:23 says, "The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb." Now, as we'll see later in his life story, Jacob and Esau become 2 completely different nations, 2 totally different nations. Jacob will become Israel, okay? And all his descendants will make up the nation of Israel. So the nation of Israel is actually named after Jacob in a sense, right? Now, Esau's descendants would become the nation of Edom, and they'd be referred to as Edomites. Now, the Edomites eventually became a godless pagan nation. Okay, just a godless pagan nation. Now, Jacob and Esau are both mentioned several times throughout the scriptures, but depending on the context, it can be referring to them individually or it can be referring to them as nations. And the reason I'm planting seed for some sermons that are coming later on this topic. When you see those 2 mentioned, God refers to them as an example individually, and he refers to them as an example corporately as nations. And we'll take a look at that as we move on to our next message. But there's a real important message here. I'm trying to keep myself from preaching it right now because that's not the plan for today. Okay? Let's move on. Genesis 25:27. It said, "When the boys grew up, Esau became a skilled hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Jacob and Esau were totally different in every way possible, totally different. For instance, Esau was a great hunter who was rugged and outdoorsy. How many people here remember the Marlboro Man from the 70s and 80s? How many people remember that? For some reason in my warped mind, when they bring up Esau, I think of a reddish Marlboro Man. I don't know why. Because he was just rugged and tough looking and outdoorsy. Now, it's kind of funny because the scriptures don't show us any evidence that he was especially spiritual. It tells us about his strengths, as far as physical strengths and things he liked to do, but it doesn't ever give us the indication that he was any kind of spiritual whatsoever, even from the beginning. Now, Esau was Isaac's favorite. And a lot of people say why. And it says here because he loved game. Listen, Esau loved to hunt and he loved to prepare game, and Isaac liked to eat it. So, it was his favorite, right? Now, people always say they don't have favorite kids. Do you think that's true? I am not even commenting on that. I just wanted to see if I could get any one of you to comment on it while your kids were here. No, but Esau was definitely Jacob's, or Esau was definitely Isaac's favorite. Now, Jacob wasn't a gifted hunter. It doesn't even give us any idea that he was rugged of any way at all. He was like the mama's boy who stayed home and did dishes and could cook. He was a lot like Scotty. He liked chick flicks and things like that. Yeah. But he was deceptive and he was sneaky. That was some talents that he had. But the Bible indicates that he was more spiritual than Esau. Sure, he was a deceptive guy, but he was more spiritual than Esau. Now, Jacob was Rebekah's favorite, and that was likely because he was gentle and he was a homebody. He was a homebody. In Hebrew, the phrase living in tents, it said he was a man that lived in tents. That actually means something similar to a homemaker. So he was, there's so many jokes I'm keeping myself from saying right now, but he was kind of a homemaker. He was not rugged. I'll leave it at that. Anyway. Now, the first recorded example of Jacob being deceitful is one we're probably all pretty familiar with, and it comes out in Genesis 25:29. It says, when Jacob had cooked the stew, Esau came in from the field and was famished. So Jacob was at the house cooking. All right, and Esau comes in from the field and he's hungry. Verse 30, and Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of the red stuff there, for I am famished. Therefore, his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, first, sell me your birthright. Esau said, behold, I am about to die. So of what use then is this birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. Would you sell your birthright for bread and lentil stew? Ugh. So he gave him bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So this is kind of interesting because a lot of people try to justify what Jacob did, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it does boil down to the fact that Esau despised his birthright. See, Jacob knew that Esau loved to eat. He knew that. And he knew that Esau loved the stew that he prepared. He knew that. And he knew that when he came in from the field, he was going to be famished. He knew that he would be exceptionally hungry from being in the fields all day. So he also knew that Esau wasn't very spiritual and he wasn't very concerned with their traditions. That was pretty obvious. And because of that, he knew Esau didn't care that much about his birthright, but Jacob did. See, the birthright gave you everything. The birthright gave you basically the run of the place. Everything was given to you, right? And you would disperse it as you saw fit. It meant a lot to Jacob. It didn't really mean anything to Esau. And because of that, Jacob likely believes Esau wasn't deserving of his birthright. That's probably how he was justifying that to himself. He's just not deserving of it. Now, that doesn't excuse Jacob's deception, but it proves that his motives weren't all bad. They were bad, but they weren't all bad. So Jacob devises a plan to con Esau out of his birthright, and Esau falls for it 100%. So Jacob traded stew with Esau for his birthright. And I started thinking about this, and I thought, how good was that stew? That he would give up his birthright. And I thought, this is the dumbest thing ever. So I tried to plug myself into this story. And I thought, I would never sell my birth. Well, if it were Jim's Pizza, I'd be like, absolutely not. I'm not trading my birthright for Jim's Pizza. Does that have mushrooms too? Okay, here, take it. But no, I mean, this proves Esau, his birthright just wasn't that important to him. And I also think that Esau was being a little overly dramatic. Okay, do you really think he was about to die? You know how kids do that? They'll trip and scratch themselves and they'll come in and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Your kids ever do that? Or they fall over and get a bump on their elbow and I've got a chipped bone. I'm like, no, you got a bruise. He comes in like a little boy and says, I'm starving. Just give me one swallow so I don't perish right before you. So I think he was being a little bit of a drama queen there. But, whatever. But this was just more proof that Esau was more self-absorbed than he was spiritual. He didn't really think much about other people. But before judging him too harshly, think about it. Have you ever justified your own sin? Have you ever done that? And it's amazing how we do it. Because we will judge other people so harshly for what they do. Right? And isn't it ironic that what we judge other people for is never the sin that we struggle with? You ever notice that? Now, if it's a sin that we struggle with, we're very understanding. We get it. Oh, yeah, Christian people would commit that sin because I do, right? So we're a lot more understanding. But there's a lot of times that we try to justify our own sins. And I want to give you some examples of this because every time we start talking about Jacob, everybody's like, I can't believe God used him. Let's look at this. Here's some things we justify. Have you ever said, I know I'm not supposed to gossip, but, anybody here ever say that? Or they say, I know this is probably gossip, but, so God forgive me. Then what do? Gossip. Okay, we try to excuse that, right? That's something I know everybody in here has done, right? How about this one? Well, I'm not going to report that cash on my taxes because the government always cheats us. Anybody ever said that one? When you sign that line and you say you've reported everything, if you haven't, you know what that's called, right? That's called a lie. Everybody's going, creative tax? No. It's called a lie. How about this one? This one gets me. When people say, excuse my French, but anybody here ever do that? Some of you better say yes, because I know. Right? We always try to excuse our sin. And so a lot of time we judge others for it, but think how many times you excuse the sins in your life. And so I was told something from an old preacher a long time ago. He said, you never have to excuse what's right. If it's right, it doesn't need an excuse. And I remember thinking, that's stupid. And I walked out and I started thinking about it. And that's true. You never have to justify to yourself helping the poor eat. You ever had to justify that? You never have to justify helping someone who's in need. You don't have to justify reading your Bible. You don't have to justify complimenting someone. So generally, if you're justifying something you're about to do, maybe you should take a closer look at it, whether it's something you should be doing. But everything we see in these Bible characters, realize they're pictures of us. We have the same nature they had. Now, that can be scary when you think of some of the things that they've done, but it can also be encouraging because God used these people in huge ways. So I just wanted to set the scene a little bit there. Don't look at him like, you can't believe God did this, because God, listen, he judges fairly, and we do a lot of the same things. Listen, regardless of why we sin has consequences, and God won't accept our lame excuses. So as we'll see later in Jacob's life, often it's the sins we excuse that come back to bite us. We'll look at that later. But here's where we got to get into some more of his deception. If this were an infomercial, this would be where I'd say, but wait, there's more. Because Jacob has more deception up his sleeve for Esau, and this one is bad. Genesis 27:1 says, now it came about when Isaac was old, his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, my son, and he said, here I am. Isaac said, behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please, boy, was that a guilt trip? I mean, think what a guilt trip that was. He just wants food. He says, come here. I'm old and could die any moment. Now will you cook for me? I don't get it. Anyway, behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die. See, there was a blessing called the blessing of the firstborn, and this is when kind of handing the mantle down. This is when you would say, I'm giving you the blessing of the firstborn. You will run my home. Everyone in the home will answer to you. The servants will answer to you. So there was a blessing that you would give that was kind of at that time of passing the torch. So when the time came to give the blessing of the firstborn, Jacob was again deceitful. He heard about this, okay? But this time, his mom got involved in the deception. As a matter of fact, Rachel planned this deception, okay? Now, a lot of people try to use that to excuse Jacob, but as you'll see when we read this, he had no excuse, right? But this time, his mom was heavily involved. Look at chapter 27, verse 6. It said, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, your curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice and go get them for me. So it's pretty obvious here where Jacob learned his deceitfulness, isn't it? It's pretty obvious that he got that, at least in part, from his mom. But in all fairness to Rebekah, he had a lot of other bad examples when it comes to deceit also. Remember what Abraham did when he was in Egypt? Remember that? Remember, Sarah was a hottie, and he was terrified they were going to kill him so they could steal his wife. So he goes in and tells them that she was his sister. He lied about it, trying to save his own skin. So we see deception there. Then we see Isaac later in the scriptures did the exact same thing Abraham did, except to the king of the Philistines. His wife Rebekah was evidently a hottie as well. So on his way to the Philistines, he thought, I can't tell them that she's my wife. They'll kill me and steal her. So he tells the king of the Philistines that she's his sister, and when in essence it was his wife. So he lied also. So Abraham had some deceit in him, and Isaac had some deceit in him, and Rebekah had some deceit in him. So he had it all the way around him. It's not just her, but he had generations of examples of deceitfulness to lead him astray in that arena. And since Rebekah knew Isaac was almost blind, she decided she was going to exploit that for Jacob. So Rebekah told Jacob to go kill 2 young goats to prepare for Isaac to eat. Now, Jacob was nervous because he was afraid he was going to get caught. See, Isaac was a smart guy, and he's like, well, what if he wants me to come close to him? Because I don't sound like Esau. I don't smell like Esau. He's out in the field all the time. He's like, I don't feel like Esau. I'm smooth and he's hairy. He's like, if he catches me, notice he didn't have a reservation because it was wrong. Did you notice that? Of all his things that he is worried about, the one reservation he doesn't have is, this is a lie. I shouldn't be doing it. No, he's like, you know what? I just don't want to get caught. He said, because if I get caught, he'll curse me instead of bless me. He'll curse me. And his mom's basically saying, don't worry about it. I'll take that curse for you, which she couldn't have done. She's saying, just do what I said to do. Now, again, Esau was an outdoorsman and probably smelled like the outdoors, like campfire wood or whatever. I don't know, right? And Jacob was a mama's boy who probably smelled like Dolce & Gabbana. But, so he was afraid that they were going to get caught. It really scared him to death. Now, so she told Jacob, listen, let's cover your arms in the smooth of your neck. We're going to cover that with hair, so that if your father feels you, he'll feel hair. When I read that, I'm thinking, how hairy was Esau? You're going to put goat skin on the man? And Isaac's going to feel that and go, there's my goat-feeling son. I mean, how hairy was this guy, right? So she says, put it on the smooth of your neck and put it on your arms. And that way, if he feels you, he'll feel like he's touching Esau. Then she goes and she gets some of Esau's clothes and puts those clothes on him. So if he smells Jacob, he'll smell like Esau. Now, as you're going to see, he's suspicious, but he does go for it, right? So let's take a look at this. Genesis 27:18. says, then he came to his father and said, my father, and he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Okay, this is the first indication he knew something was wrong. Listen, I'm forgetful, but I've never forgot the sound of my children's voice. Okay, so he knew something was up already. Verse 19, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Now, if those of you who thought that this was all Rebekah's idea, here you're going to see that he was totally on board because he lies like a dog. Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit and eat my game that you may bless me. Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. See how quickly he's lying? I mean, immediately, how did you kill this so fast? Because God's blessing me in my lies, right? Verse 21, then Isaac said to Jacob, please come close that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob came close to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So the goat hair worked. Verse 23, he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. So he said, bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game that I may bless you. And he brought it to him, and he ate. He also brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, please come close and kiss me, my son. So he came close and kissed him. And when he smelled the smell of garments, he blessed him. Now, see how slick that was? You know, Isaac goes, come close and kiss me. Do you think he really wanted a kiss? He just wanted to get an opportunity to smell him, right? It said, see, the smell of my son is like the smell of the fields which the Lord has blessed. What that is, I have no idea. Now may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fattest of the earth and on the abundance of the grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brothers, and your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. Okay, I'm going to throw this in for free. But you know all this stuff going on about the Palestinian and Israel conflict that's out there? And people are always trying to get me to... It cracks me up how many people come to me and say, well, what's your response going to be? I'm like, nobody cares what my response is, number one, because I didn't see, CNN knocking at my front door. But second of all, here's the thing. I will never say anything bad about Israel. I'm just throwing it out there. Because people, listen, if you want to feel sorry for Palestinians, that's fine, pray for them. But let me explain something to you. These are God's chosen people. And several times in the Old Testament, he said, those who curse them will be cursed. Those who bless them will be blessed. So before you jump on the bandwagon so you can be, culturally and politically correct and everybody can pat you on the back and you can run out and protest, realize this. You may be protesting to your own demise, okay? Because those who bless you, I will bless. Remember, he becomes Israel, right? So when people are dissing the Jews, understand, those who bless me, I will bless. Those who curse me, I will curse. Okay, just throwing that in for free. I don't want to see any of you guys curse, so understand something. If the world's doing it, you probably shouldn't. I'm just throwing it out there. Anyway, I put that in there for free. It won't be on your bill. Okay, so it's obvious Jacob was just as willing to lie and deceive and steal as Rebekah was. So he was equally guilty. He had several opportunities he could have stepped in and said, no. I can't go through with this, Dad. I'm sorry. It's Jacob. I just don't think Esau deserves it. He could have said that. But no, he's like, no, I'm Esau. Your voice sounds like Jacob. Crazy. I don't know why I sound like Jacob, other than the fact that I am him, right? He had several opportunities where he could have shut this down, and he chose not to. So Jacob and Rachel's plan to steal the blessing of the firstborn, in essence, it was just a success. But when Esau found out, Esau finally comes back and he's prepared his dish. And, Esau wasn't as big a cook as Jacob, so I kind of wonder what that looked like. But he comes in with his meal ready to give it to his father, and his dad basically says, hey, I already gave it away. He's like, what do you mean I gave it away? He's like, I was deceived. I gave it away. And he said, don't you have anything left for me? He said, I can bless you, but I can't give you the blessing of the firstborn because it's only given once, and I gave that away already, right? So by doing so, by giving Jacob that blessing, now, remember what God told Rebekah? The older shall serve the younger, remember? Well, part of the blessing was all your brothers will bow down to you. So in essence, he made Esau Jacob's servant and didn't even realize it. And it was already done and couldn't be changed. So he did bless Esau, but not with the kind of blessing he should have had, right? Now, so Esau was furious. They already hated each other. I mean, they didn't like each other in the womb. They were fighting over something, right? So they didn't like each other. So he had a plan. He's like, I'm going to wait for my dad to die. And when my dad dies, I'm killing Jacob. This was the beginning of that heated conflict where they were nations trying to kill each other. He's like, I will kill him after my dad dies. Now, next week we'll see Jacob reap what he sowed, because Jacob is going to be deceived also, and we'll take a look at that next week. And one question that I'm often asked, this is what I want to close up with, is one question I'm always asked about this was God okay with Jacob's deceptive practices? Has anybody ever wondered that? Because, I mean, later he calls him Israel. He becomes the father of the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, through which the lineage of Christ comes. Jesus comes through the lineage of a deceiver. So I've had people ask me, did God approve of these deceptive practices, right? And the simple answer is no, he didn't. But God will use the good and the bad in people for his glory. Yes. Okay? And that's something we have to remember. God doesn't play by the rules we play by. He does what's best for his plan. So he uses the good and the bad for his glory. For example, how many people have ever heard of Alexander the Great? How many people have heard of Alexander the Great? He was and probably still is the greatest battle technician there ever was. I mean, he conquered the known world of that time. It's said at the end of his life that his generals, he had 4 main generals who ended up dividing his kingdom when he died. But it's said that when they found him, his 4 generals found him one day sitting by himself and weeping. And they said, why is it you weep? And he said, because there's no other nations for me to conquer. This is how powerful this man was. Very, very powerful. Now, during his reign, like I said, he conquered the known world. No leader, no army could stop him. And ironically, when he would capture a place, he would take care of them. He would set up like government food to take care of the people who couldn't work for themselves. And I mean, he took care of them. He really wasn't a terrible person to take over. And history shows us that there were actually nations and lands that wanted Alexander to come and conquer them. They said a lot of times his armies would come in, and even the soldiers wanted to serve under him because he was good to his soldiers, and they would pretty much just lay down their arms and say, we quit, because they wanted to be conquered by him, because he not only was a great battle technician, he also was a merciful leader who took care of his people. So a lot of people wanted him to take over their nations. Now, after conquering all these nations, he had an issue. He wanted to be able to reign over all these nations with one language. He wanted to be able to communicate with all of them with one language. So he required that they all be taught one universal language in addition to their native language. One universal language. And that universal language was Koine Greek. Well, years after his reign came and went, Jesus and the disciples started preaching, right? They started preaching. And the fact that most of these nations, at least a majority of them, spoke Koine Greek made their preaching of the gospel much easier. Right? So an evil man, and understand something, Alexander the Great was evil. He was a pagan. He was immoral. He was just a good leader. But he was a pagan and he was immoral. But God used him in that he got most nations to speak Koine Greek, so when they started teaching, they could teach in Greek and always reach people, because there was always a remnant of people there that spoke Greek. Also, the New Testament was mainly written in Greek because of this. Right? So think about this. Alexander was not godly at all, and he was a pagan, and he would have cared less about Jesus. He probably would have been one of those trying to kill him. He cared less about Jesus. He didn't care about the Jews or the God of the Jews. None of that stuff meant anything to him, right? But God used his leadership and his ability to outwit and defeat all enemies for good, okay? Because, teaching those he conquered Greek made spreading the gospel easier later down the line. So God uses good and bad people for his cause. Now listen, I'm not going to get political on you because I can't stand that, but I will tell you this. We always panic about who we want in the White House, who we want in the State House, and I get it. Everybody has a right to have their own opinions. God bless you, right? But understand this, don't ever think a leader is going to change God's plan. Don't ever think that, because it can be the most evil leader in the world and God can use them, right? It can be the most godly person in the world and God can use them. Listen, I have my leanings. I know who I want to see in office, but I'm going to tell you this right now. As long as God's on the throne, it doesn't matter a whole lot. Now, can life get rough for us? Absolutely, life can get rough for us. But at the end of the day, we have promises we can lean on, and those promises are God will provide for and protect us. And someday he's going to come and get us and take us home. I think sometimes when we get involved in politics or relationships and we allow that to absorb our life, we get this false sense of hopelessness. And it really bothers me to see all the comments people are making on social media like we are hopeless. Understand, if you know Jesus Christ as your Savior, you are not hopeless. Okay, and I don't care what's going wrong in your life, it's not big enough or bad enough to where God can't reach down and pick you up if you surrender to Him. So don't fall into this fatalist mindset. It's okay to have an opinion in who you want to be in office, but it's more important that you worry about who's on the throne and that you spend the time you spend worrying and fighting on social media about who's going to be in office. Maybe use that same time to share Jesus with people on social media, and we'd have more people saved making better decisions about who's in those positions. Just throwing it out there. Anyway, rant over. Now let me move on. So, it's important you understand, even though God did not agree with what Jacob was doing, he did know that Jacob had to be the rightful leader. He knew that. He knew that Esau had no concern about being godly, and it was the right thing, so he used it for his glory, but no, God did not think it was, or agree with it, rather. So likewise, God always intended, like I said, he wanted Jacob to be the leader. Did he want it to happen this way? I'm not saying he did, right? But he knew it was going to happen this way. And although God didn't orchestrate Jacob's, deceitful practices, he did use them. He did use them for his own glory. And I'm glad he did, because it proves something about the God we serve. It proves something really important about God. God doesn't just use the perpetually saintful people to do things, right? People always tell me, well, I shouldn't do that because I don't know. I'm just not, I didn't go to Bible college, or I didn't do this, or I'm not that. Listen, it doesn't matter. Here's what matters. If you're willing to be used, God will use you, because God uses the good and the bad, and he will use you for his purpose if you allow him to, right? He's going to accomplish his will, and he doesn't just do it with all the goody two-shoes. He does it with everybody. He always uses broken people to fix a broken world with an unbreakable message of grace. Okay? He uses broken people in a broken world through an unbreakable message of grace, and I think it's important that we remember that. Now, Jacob is a lot like all of us in that he had a lot of sinful hang-ups. He had a ton of them. And he often acted before he thought. We see that time and time again. But God never expected us to be perfect. He actually expects us to be imperfect. Did you know that? God never, for 1 second, thought any of us would ever be sinless. That's why he sent his son to be sinless on our behalf. He knew none of us would be sinless. And I was raised to think that it was possible to not sin. Anybody else raised that way? I was raised with some pretty self-righteous people. And I thought to myself, man, I'm never going to go to heaven because they don't ever do anything wrong. And I grew up to find out later, they did plenty wrong. You know what I mean? God never said he needed perfect people. He just needs people to believe in the perfect so he can use them perfectly. But he never asked for perfect people. And we're going to see that as we start to move on throughout the rest of this message, that Jacob eventually will come to his own, and you'll see why he made it into the Hall of Faith. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll pick up there next week. I'm going to ask if you would to please bow your heads. Now, if this is your first time, we always like to give an invitation. So while every head's bowed and every eye's closed, if you'd like me to pray for you, I don't need to know why. And I'm not going to have you come down front. We don't do that stuff. But I do want to pray for you. Just make eye contact and you put your head right back down. Bless those people. Bless those people. And I do pray for you. Just so you know, that's not something I just do. I actually pray for you. Bless those people. If you're watching online, God knows your heart. I'll be praying for you. But believers, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not upset with people for having political preferences. I'm not upset with people because they make mistakes. I'm upset because we sometimes come across as just as hopeless as the rest of the world, and we can't do that. The world needs to look to us for hope. They need to see us as beacons of hope. Because we know at the end of the day we win, and our attitude needs to be more like that and less bitter. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your love and your mercy and your kindness, but especially your grace. Only you and I know how bad I actually am. And only you and I know how powerful your grace has moved in my life. But I thank you that you loved us all so much that you made a way for us to have eternal life, despite the fact that we're imperfect and make mistakes. You loved us so much and desired to have a relationship with us so much that you sent your son to carry our sin and to bear our punishment. And I thank you so much, Jesus, that you love me enough to do that. And I just pray if there's someone here who doesn't know you, that whatever's holding them back, you remove that, because we want them to come to you and believe, because that's all you asked. And anyone who believes you promised would have eternal life. And if they make that decision, I pray they contact us. But God, for those of us who are believers, help us get our focus back. We are not hopeless, God, and we are not dependent on any human leader. We are dependent on you. And no matter what happens in this world, as long as you're on the throne, our promises are still there and viable. Bless us to be able to trust in those promises enough to live a life that's not bitter and angry, but hopeful. A life that shows people the peace that comes with knowing you're in the center of God's grace. We just pray that you would go with us as we leave here and keep us safe. And if you don't return to take us home before we meet again, let us come together one more time and give you the praise, honor, and glory you're so worthy of. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.